Hello everyone, my name is Jenn. I am the archivist at the Lewis Army Museum, formerly known as the Fort Lewis Military Museum. I wanted to come in and talk to y'all today about the archives. Being the archivist, I deal primarily in the archival material as opposed to the three-dimensional artifacts, which is usually the things that you would see at a museum. But equally, and in my personal opinion, even more important, is all of the paperwork that goes into preserving history in the form of documentation, photographs, film, and other kinds of media. And so I wanted to pass this around. You'll notice that on my presentations, I am very sparse on words. I'm of the sound mind that using a picture instead conveys 1,000 words in much a better way than my voice could ever hope to do. So just a little bit of a background from me. I'm from the OK state of Ohio. It's not great, it's all right. But if you've ever been to Columbus, I am a Buckeye. Graduated from Ohio State in 2015 with a degree in History and International Studies. So go Bucks. Maybe not around here, that's okay. So right now, I am currently a graduate student studying museum studies with a certificate in archiving sciences at Johns Hopkins University. Most people know it for the medical school, but there are other things there as well. It is a full university. So in addition to being the archival lead at the Lewis Army Museum, I'm also a staff intern with the Washington State Archives at the Olympia branch at the Capitol Mall. And so I'm going to take and hazard a guess that everyone here has seen the Lewis Army Museum. Mayhaps you didn't quite recognize what it is, but it is the big white building right off of I-5 with all the tanks. If you've been on I-5 through the JBLM corridor, you've almost definitely seen it. It's a fantastic building built in 1917, and it was originally designated as the Red Shield Inn. And so, bottom line up front, our museum's mission statement. The mission of the Lewis Army Museum is to collect, preserve, display, and interpret artifacts relevant to the history of Camp Lewis, Fort Lewis, and the Army component of Joint Base Lewis McChord, as well as the units and soldiers which have served there. The museum also explores the role that the U.S. Army played in the development and defense of the Pacific Northwest. Our museum features an outstanding collection of uniforms, weapons, military art, and memorabilia associated with the United States Army. And so just a bit of a background of the internal workings of the Lewis Army Museum. Eric Flint is our director. He is a retired infantry lieutenant colonel. And Heidi Pearson is our curator, who comes from an anthropological archaeology background, and she was actually formerly on the archaeological team here at Vancouver Barracks. So in addition to our mission statement, we support the soldiers, commanders, and units on JBLM via education, but we also serve the greater public and allow visitors to access the museum without a base pass. That's a relatively new procedure. You no longer need a base pass to visit, and I'll be giving more information on our public access policies more towards the end. So with 3 staff members and a handful of volunteers, we typically have our work cut out for us. We have an estimated 25,000 visitors per year. And we also attend dozens of events in the area, and we also give dozens of talks, such as this one, which provide our outreach to get the word out that yes, our museum is no longer closed as it has been for the greater part of 6 years. We've just undergone a $6 million renovation. It's absolutely fantastic, absolutely beautiful. If you haven't been there yet to see it, I strongly encourage you to stop on by. So we also host a number of events at the Lewis Army Museum, the largest of which happened this past August. That was our Living Historian Weekend, where we invite living historians who are the reenactors to come out. It can be any era, any faction of pretty much any part of military history to come out and showcase the absolute best parts of and favorite parts of their collections. So we are a 100% donation-based institution. In the archives of the Lewis Army Museum, we have the following assets. So we have a documents and manuscripts archives, a photo archives, the map archives, an artwork collection, a technical manual library, a research library, and a digital archives. In our documents and manuscripts archives, we have over 100 individual personalized collections consisting of official U.S. Army publications as well as the private collections that came from donors or records creators with provenance to Fort Lewis in the Pacific Northwest. Our largest collection is the 9th Infantry Division's collection, and that collection comprised of their entire history with a focus on the Mobile Riverine Force during the Vietnam era. In our photo and artwork archives, we have original photographs of FDR, Eisenhower, Elvis Presley, various Army Chiefs of Staffs, combatant generals, and other very important people of note. And the one that I mentioned about Elvis Presley, that's actually when he was in the Army. He was with a self-propelled artillery unit, and he's in a unit photo standing in front of his weapon, his Big 109. It's a pretty fantastic photo. And so our research library is specifically tailored to a military historian. In addition to classic military readings, we have subject sections dedicated to biographies, officership, military medicine, and of course the different eras that the United States has been at war. Our technical manual library has more than just technical manuals. We have several hundred manuals on tactics, strategy, equipment operation, and anything else that could tell you how the Army has worked over the course of however long the Army has been, which has been since 1776 pretty much. And finally, the digital archives contains both born digital and digitalized facsimiles of our collections. It's also our storage space for our processing packets. It also serves as our graphic studio, our design studio, etc. And so every collection and artifact that makes it into our collection starts with an interested person offering a donation. Currently, our higher headquarters, the Center of Military History, has placed a moratorium on accepting new artifacts into our collection. However, this moratorium doesn't include what we call flat packs. And flat packs include papers, letters, journals, scrapbooks, photos, film, maps, basically anything that's two-dimensional. And my job is supervising a small team of volunteers as we come and process the entirety of the archives. And so to give more background on that background, the museum has been in operation at its current location since 1972, when the Old Red Children was condemned for habitation and designated a historical building. Over the past 50 years, the entire Army Museum enterprise has been feverishly and, in my opinion, hoarding artifacts to the point where we have approximately 20 Ike jackets, dozens of Vietnam-era fatigues, a ball of electrical tape, and a roll of toilet paper in our collection. The ball of electrical tape, I include this in here as maybe a unnecessary or non-historically valuable item, but it is my personal favorite artifact in our entire collection, so it doesn't matter, it's staying. We can get rid of the toilet paper roll. So in addition to this collecting frenzy, previous administrators who were very well-intentioned and did an absolutely tremendous amount of work with what they had. Basically, they were an isolated little museum on Fort Lewis. They didn't really have the support of a higher headquarters like we do now. But they accepted donations of archival collections without any sort of process for categorizing, arranging, or describing their content, which are now standard things that have been codified into very linear policies and procedures by the Society of American Archivists. So this has led to the unfortunate scenario of having all of this amazing information and history at our fingertips, but we don't actually know what we have. I've been with the Lewis Army Museum since November of 2017, and I've been working as the archival lead since the beginning of this year. And currently, my archival time is 100% spent catching up on our backlog. So, in order to eventually work through this backlog and provide a tool for knowledge transfer, I've created a set of policies and procedures that are in line with the standards set forth by the Society of American Archivists. And right now, I'm going to give you a very quick, rapid-fire outline of what we do and how we do it. And throughout this collection, I'll be guiding you through the Batman collection, which is one of my favorites for obvious reasons, mostly nomenclature-wise. I actually have Captain Batman's collection right here. And so after this, I actually brought nitrile gloves. I invite you to come on up here and take a look through our work, see kind of how we've taken this collection, which came to us literally in a shoebox, and we've kind of taken it and put it into an archival grade 2.5-inch storage box, which is it's supposed to be its permanent home for the rest of time. And so the first step in processing is appraisal. During appraisal, we sit down with the donor and give them an overview on how their collection will be processed, what will happen, and of course, our disclaimers. If the donor agrees to our interim conditions, we go through the collection to determine if ours would be the best institution to house the collection. Again, theoretically, until the end of time. Because of the permanence of the accessions process, the primary currency for archivists is storage space. Shelving. That's pretty much the gold standard. If you're trying to trade with an archivist, if you offer them shelves, they'll probably jump on it. So every box that takes up space on our shelves can no longer be used, and space, of course, is limited. Some examples of what we're looking for during the accessions process include, does the collection have provenance to Fort Lewis, its units and soldiers, or the Pacific Northwest? Is this collection of historical value, not monetary value, but historical value? And last, is there a better institution for this collection to be in? For example, if we received an interested donor and the collection's contents are primarily information on, for example, Island County, Washington, perhaps the Island County Museum would be a better repository to hold this collection. And so if we accept a collection for donation, we prepare a deed of gift to transfer ownership. It's worth noting that anything that's donated to the museum becomes property of the federal government, and all of its ownership rights, including future decision-making on the collection, resides with the museum itself. And so you know, if you give the federal government something, chances are you're not going to get it back. It's the general rule of thumb, if, just in case any of you have to deal with the federal government and are operating a quid pro quo or a give and take. Don't expect anything back.
I figured that out when I got drafted. Kind of like taxes.
Don't feel bad, sir. I volunteered. So once we own a collection, we begin the actual process of stabilizing and rehousing the collection. So my team combs through the collection, doing very minor preservation actions, such as removing metal fasteners, placing fragile documents in protectors, mounting or storing slides, and basically anything that could prolong the life of these documents. What a lot of people aren't aware of is that paper, due to the nature that it's made, is naturally self-destructive. It will eventually eat itself over time. Newspapers are even more so. That's why if you take a piece of paper that has been sitting around for 100 years and a newspaper that's been sitting around for 100 years, chances are the paper is going to be very yellow, very brittle, very oniony, and the newspaper is probably going to be a very nice collection of dust sitting on your table. And so we are also looking for a material that isn't considered to be of significant historical value. And so this includes duplicates, photocopies of non-original materials, blank pages, folders, page dividers, etc. On average, with a collection that is 4 boxes in size, after processing, we're going to be left with half a box's volume of disposable materials. And so you can think about that, 4 boxes, and then half of a box of that is material that needs to be discarded. And items that are marked as disposable will be drawn up in a separated materials inventory and presented to the donor to see if they would like that material returned. Even if it's something like blank pages or document protectors, we still, just in case if the donor wants that back, we want to make sure that they have the opportunity. Otherwise, we do dispose of that material for them. So at the same time as preservation, the collection processor is making notes on the collection. Basically, they are researching that collection. They are they're piecing together the story, the timeline of this entire collection. One of the best parts about processing a collection is becoming intimately familiar with its contents and the record's creator. The Batman collection in particular has a wonderful story arc from Captain Batman's tour of duty on the Western Front with the 91st Division, going to the interwar period, to his incarceration and courts-martial, and then to his untimely death from acute encephalitis while serving as an ROTC instructor at the State University of Iowa. But even after Captain Batman died, his collection's story arc actually continues because his wife saved documents relating to the mortuary affairs and her correspondence with the Veterans Bureau. She had to take all of their belongings, including Captain Batman's remains, from Iowa City to Seattle. And so the only way to do that at the time was via railroad. And so she had to discuss with the Veterans Bureau about how to do that because this was the death of a regular Army officer in peacetime. And there wasn't really a procedure for that. So she was inching along, again, some of that give and take with the government, where the government wasn't necessarily playing along. And so our collections are sorted into a very simple collection to box to folder to item system. We don't always process to the item level. However, everyone on my team is trained and processes at least one collection this way, just in case extreme detail is needed. Now, when I say processing down to the item level, this is the first page of Batman's collection inventory. So we have our box, which is the collection itself, because this collection resides in one box. And then after that, we have our folders, which are labeled by year. And then we get down to the item number, which are described in extreme detail all the way down to the subject, receiver, sender, and date for correspondence. So once inventorying is complete, the processor is able to start crafting the most important document when it comes to archiving, and that's the finding aid. The finding aid is what a researcher would first see of the collection before scheduling time with us, before coming to the museum to look at the collection, before scanning and copying anything. They would see the finding aid. And so our finding aids contain admin information, acquisition information, summary and use restrictions, and arrangement schemas. The finding aid is an indexed file that is searchable on our digital computer, as opposed to using a dedicated software. Instead, we use the native Windows system for our search functions, which doesn't work quite as well because it's not specifically tailored to archives, but it does work, especially when we have this finding aid index, because it has the most relevant and most important information. And then finally, after hours, days, or even weeks of processing, the packet is ready to be reviewed and signed off, and its collection sent to its permanent home in our documents and manuscript storage room. Every packet is reviewed by our curator, Heidi, and that's done for consistency and further editing if necessary. As a standard, we have 3 copies of every single processing packet that we complete. One is physically stored with the collection, such as the example with this processing packet at the front of Batman's box. Additionally, Heidi keeps one in her records with the rest of her accessions and acquisition donor related information. And we also keep one digital copy on our digital archives computer. Once a collection is complete, it is put into our digitization queue, where other members of our archival team scan or photograph the collection to keep it as a facsimile in the digital archives. And it's important to note that the items that we initially scan are not supposed to be graphics quality or reproduction quality. And instead, what they're supposed to do is provide a window into what this collection offers. And then we're able, based on need, we're able to go back, take the collection out of storage, and then scan it to a much higher resolution, a much higher quality as needed. And so that, for example, is what has happened here. The image on the left is one of our facsimiles that is created. It's just a regular TIFF file. However, the one on the right, which is a campaign, it's campaign art for the 91st Division, is scanned to a multi-TIFF at 600 square dots per inch. We have several scanners of professional grade quality for these in order to reproduce these, and we're able to use these higher quality, higher resolution images for our promotional items, for our outreach items, and if we're creating a special exhibit or a special showing, we're able to use those as well. And so that's a very brief overview of the archival process, but how does that translate into what you, the researcher, needs? Our archival assets are open to the public, and that's by request, and we are always trying to do outreach to let the public know what is available. Since we've been closed for 6 years, the word is slowly trickling out that the museum is back open, that we have assets available, and that we're more than willing and more than happy to do our outreach mission via research requests. We usually get probably 15 to 20 research requests per month, which is, I would call that a decent number for the 5 members of my archival staff and myself. It definitely keeps us busy. And the first step to beginning a research request is to send us an email with an attached research request form. I brought copies with me. They're up here at the front. You're more than happy to take one. All you have to do is fill it out and then either scan it or mail it to our email, and all of our contact information, as well as the digital version of the research request form, can also be found on our website at www.lewisarmymuseum.com. So after a request is turned into us, it's routed to me, and then I assign a member of our archival team as the primary researcher. So our staff researcher will check all of our assets and then compile a list of pertinent resources that are likely to basically give a hit on what you're looking for. The results, once they are compiled, are sent via email or CD, and the requester is also welcome to schedule a time to come on into the museum and see the assets in person. And from there, they can also they're able to use our scanners, they're able to use our photography lab if they would like to make reproductions. And so if you're not able to find the information that you're looking for, there are a number of resources that are available. When looking for information on specific service members, the National Archives and Records Administration has service records and other information that are very free to access, 100% free to access actually. However, it's important to note that in 1973, there was a fire that ripped through the NARA's archive storage building, and it destroyed millions of records from World War I, World War II, and the Korean War. But if you do send in a request to NARA, the absolute worst that could happen is that they'll just say that they don't have any information. So I would always, always, always recommend sending our request to them and putting NARA at the top of your resource list. Mostly because even if you can't find anything with NARA, there are regional offices available. And the regional offices have their own repositories that might not necessarily be available via NARA's webpage. And so if you're looking for records within Washington State, the Office of the Secretary of State has created a searchable database of digitized records in cooperation with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Interestingly enough, it's a very long story on how that partnership came to be. Although several other states have online databases, as far as I know, the Washington Archives is the only database that's still actively maintained today. I believe Idaho has one, as well as Minnesota has one, but they're not kept current, they're not up to date, and they're not being updated with new records and information. And so if publicly available content turns up 0 results, there are pay-for-play databases out there. As a disclaimer, I'm not advocating or advertising for any of these sources. As with any of the publicly available content on NARA or with the Secretary of State's Archives website, your mileage may vary. And so it's always nice when genealogical societies, historical societies, libraries, they have access to these databases such as Ancestry, ProQuest, Fold3. And if you're unsure where you're able to access, if you're able to access those with a membership subscription, I recommend you contact your local library. Usually there is a reference librarian on staff who keeps track of all of the memberships and subscriptions that their library has access to. If you're looking for genealogical resource guides, I highly suggest, again, exploring NARA's website in its entirety. There are free resource guides, NARA navigation guides, as well as contact information for the regional archives. And our regional archives, which includes Washington, Alaska, Idaho, and Oregon, are located at the National Archives at Seattle, and the address is located in the transcripts that I handed out. But in some, they can be emailed at seattle.archives@nara.gov. So this has been an ultra rapid fire, pretty much feeding from the fire hose about the archives and resources that we have available at the Lewis Army Museum. I have brochures and other items available up here at the front that you're more than free to take, as well as little stickers and buttons, basically Lewis Army Museum little swag giveaways that I really like bringing out here with me. My archives are typically open from Monday through Friday, 09:30 to 16:30, and I'm happy to answer any questions right now, but I will also be sticking around for a little bit. Right up here I'll be kind of helicoptering over the 2 collections that we have up here. Just to let you know what is up here, I brought my 2 favorite collections from my archives. The first one is the Iris Vivian G collection. It's a collection of letters that a 10-year-old girl named Vivian Goff received from one of the soldiers of the 91st Division. Vivian Goff, while the 91st Division was training at Camp Lewis, she would play her violin at the mess hall and in the other rec centers that were on post. And when the 91st Division went off to the Western Front in the Meuse-Argonne offensive, one of the soldiers stayed in contact, and when Miss Goff became Mrs. Ayers, she kept all of these letters, and they are now available in our archives. I've also brought the processing packet just in case you wanted to see a little bit of a differentiation. And then I've also pulled out one of the folders from Batman's collection. These are his photographs and other pictures that were donated with us. If you do want to take a look at Batman's collection, please use the nitrile gloves. I have them right here. The Iris collection is, everything's in document protectors, so you're free to flip through them. Everything's handwritten, so if you're able to read cursive, that'll probably be best. I apologize, I'm a millennial, and so I look at it, and it just looks like someone forgot to lift up their pencil between words. It's a secret code, yes. I'm looking at it, I might as well be trying to decipher the Morse code simulator that you have out there in the museum. I was taking a look at that. Wow, this is exactly like cursive in that I don't know what I'm doing. And so, if anyone has any public, yes?
Jen, if a group came up to visit the museum, could they pre-schedule a time where they could get a tour with you?
Absolutely.
Oh, sweet.
And actually, one of my favorite parts about working in a museum is showing off all of the cool stuff that's in the back. And
That's what we want to see.
exactly. And that's what I want to show. We have a number of items that we're not able to publicly display. That's for a number of different reasons. We have a 30-foot long Nazi battleship battle flag taken off of one of the Kriegsmarine battleships after the surrender. We also have a Viet Cong sapper's ninja suit. The ninja suit is just plain cloth black top and trousers. The individual that this ninja suit came from was actually the first Knight of Tet. Him and another sapper had blasted their way into the compound of the United States Embassy in Saigon right at the start of Tet. They made it approximately 20 meters inside the perimeter before they were both neutralized on the grounds of the compound. As this was Tet, there was a lot of stuff going on, and mortuary concerns were not one of them. In January and February, that's summertime in Vietnam, and so the remains of these two individuals stayed where they fell for 3 days before they were recovered. And so it's a bit of an eye-opener. Because the various fluids that this gentleman laid in are still very, very much stained into this uniform. Obviously, we can't show these kinds of artifacts, these kinds of objects, even though they have a fascinating history, because we want to, as a federal institution, but also as historians, we definitely want to avoid the glorification of war or any kind of ideology that goes against the American values, which is why we display a select number of Imperial Japanese artifacts, but the 30-foot Nazi battle flag, busts of Adolf Hitler, those are strictly off the table. Unfortunately, like I said, when the government owns something, it doesn't let go of them. And so currently we have no way to remove these from our collection or to get them to an institution, such as, if you remember the Indiana Jones movie, the warehouse with the lights going on in front of you, turning off behind you. That exists, by the way. It's the Center of Military History Artifact Repository in Anniston, Alabama. 100% real, or so I'm told. Yes.
I don't think I heard you mention the Korean War. My husband was in the Korean War at Fort Lewis.
Definitely. So the Korean War is actually one of our upcoming exhibits. We have a number of exhibits that are currently lined up. I believe Korea is number 3 in our queue, and that's after the 9th Division in Vietnam, the 7th Infantry Division, combat history, and then after that will be the Korean War. And one of the reasons that we haven't focused on the Korean War too much is because of the ongoing, the ongoing situation on the Korean Peninsula today. And actually, the 2nd Infantry Division, which is one of the primary divisions that is on the Korean Peninsula, is actually almost split in half. Half being in South Korea and the other half being at Joint Base McChord.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Do you have stuff going back to World War II or
or just prior to that? 1930s?
Absolutely. Our provenance, our collection criteria typically goes back to 1917 when Camp Lewis was made. We do have, especially in our archives, we have a number of items that precede that, but that still have, directly relate to Camp Lewis's history. A lot of that is from the American Lake maneuvers of the early 1900s, 1904, 6, 8, 10, and 12. And those maneuvers and the documents that those maneuvers produce are actually one of the main contributing factors as to why Camp Lewis, Fort Lewis, and JBLM is exactly in a spot where it is today.
Well, my dad was called active duty on July 1st, 1941, and was at Camp Lewis until the day after Pearl Harbor.
Okay, he was likely in the 3rd Division or the 41st Division. Those were the only 2 divisions prior to Pearl Harbor.
And during the 30s, I think he was a reserve officer, and they went for summer exercises.
Yes.
Fort Lewis.
Yep, CMTC and the ROTC were headquartered at Fort Lewis.
I'll have to look at my photographs, I have a bunch of photographs of those
Oh,
times.
fantastic. Yes, sir.
I'm curious, I took great interest in some of the record keeping that goes into documenting what it is that you have, and
Yeah.
describing it. And I'm curious how I, as an interested person, would get from what I think I want to know to what is recorded on those. I'm so used to search engines being able to put in a search term and having it find it. I'm assuming that that's not quite the way that yours works.
It's very similar. It's definitely not as robust. Google, Yahoo, Bing, they all are multi-billion-dollar companies that invest very heavily into search engine technology. What we do is when we create our finding aids, we also include a number of tags. And those tags are subject categories. So, for example, a tag would be 41st Infantry Division, Fort Lewis, World War II, pre-Pearl Harbor. When we index these finding aids, the entirety of that finding aid also becomes searchable in the native Windows Explorer search function bar. And so any word or any group of words that is on the finding aid is also searchable simply using File Explorer. And so it's really easy because if we have something that stands out, for example, we have a photo collection from the Mount Rainier Ordnance Depot, which is the modern day logistics center at JBLM, that held an Italian service unit, which were Italian POWs who were held at Camp Lewis, and they worked at the MROD, the Ordnance Depot. And we have one picture of them, and they are the only known picture of POWs at Fort Lewis. And that's because taking photographs of POWs was considered against the Geneva Convention. And so in this seemingly random collection, we have this very historically valuable, very historically significant, very rare photograph. And so we take that, Italian POWs, and we add that to our tags, as well as our special notes to the researcher. That is also, actually I can bring it up, I'll show you exactly. So here's our tag function right here, and our notes to the researcher. And the notes to the researcher also includes special handling instructions, special concerns for the researcher when they're handling these collections. But they also include those kinds of things. For example, I mentioned the Elvis Presley photograph, and that is also noted in the finding aid for the collection that it's in, because it's in a unit's collection. And I actually found it by chance. I just happened to be scrolling across, and I just looked at this individual, and I was like, hey, that looks like Elvis Presley. And then I remembered Lewis Presley was in the Army, and then I did some research and I found out that Elvis Presley was stationed at Fort Lewis, and that kind of led together. And then there's actually a different version of that photograph that's available online. And so it's the exact same photograph, but the one they have is black and white, and ours is in color. And so, very interesting. I've actually submitted that to the Elvis Presleys, to their foundation, just in case they don't have the color version of that photograph. Yes, sir.
So, are your documents, so as soon as you process the documents, they are digitized, is that correct?
Not necessarily. So digitization is actually the most time-consuming part of the entire process. And that's because we're going through each document one at a time, sometimes even half of a time, because we can only do one side at a time depending on the piece of equipment that we're using to scan. In addition, once something is scanned, it has to be uploaded into the correct format. It has to be labeled, marked, assorted, and categorized, basically following this scheme right here. So we would have one folder for boxes, a folder for folder number 1, and then the individual files would consist of each item.
And what format are you using?
So in general, remember these are facsimiles, so these aren't intended to be production quality or professional quality. We use PDFs for documents, and we use TIFFs or multi-TIFFs for photographs, for artwork, for still frame capture film. Yes.
So I noticed when you were looking, describing the tags and all that, so when you have the page from the Batman collection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Under the tags, his name isn't there. And the reason I'm asking about names is that we have several family members that we know and some that we believe were stationed at Fort Lewis between World War I all the way through World War II, right? His dad wasn't there. Our brother was in Vietnam, so was our dad. But anyway, if you had information there about their stay, that was in Fort Lewis? Okay, our brother was in Fort Lewis too. So how would we be, in our request, include their names and information about them, and then you would, if you have anything, you would be able to find it?
Correct. So when we're using when we index the file, it's not just these boxes down here that become searchable. It's every word on this
So
document.
you're OCRing the PDF?
Correct.
I got it, okay.
Apologize, I just realized I clicked, yes, I'm talking to a genealogical society. They probably know what optical character recognition
Makes
is.
sense, okay.
But yes, all of our PDFs are OCR'd, and the Word documents, they're born digital, so they tend to be born indexed as well.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome, yes.
Yeah, I've been to the museum a couple of times, and if a person is handicapped, is there a way to park by the museum rather than out in the gravel parking lot?
Absolutely. So the gravel parking lot, it does have handicap spaces, which are simply closer. However, to actually get up to the gate, to the building itself, the individual would just need to request a pass from our director, and that information is also available on our website.
Okay, the MP told me I had to fill out a bunch of paperwork, so.
The MPs tend not to deal with us nearly as much anymore, and so the information that they have tends to be the old information prior to our public access policy coming out.
So request the pass before you go.
Correct. Yes. Yes, sir.
Do you have any information on other sites in the area, like Camp Bonneville, specifically? Camp Bonneville's due east of us,
yeah.
about a 4,000 acre facility that was World War I, World War II training. Do you have anything on that specifically?
Off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure. I know that we do have a number of collections that are focused on training areas around here, as well as what used to be Fort Ord in California.
Yeah, so wait,
I was
right down the road.
ask about that, because my husband was down there too in Fort
So did you
Ord.
get all the Fort Ord stuff too?
We didn't get all of it. unfortunately. I'm actually not sure as to where it's gone. We did receive all of the Vancouver Barracks records when they transferred over. There wasn't very much.
It goes back how far in Vancouver Barracks?
I'm sorry?
How far back does it go, Vancouver Barracks?
Late 19th century.
Yeah.
No, the early stuff from Fort Vancouver.
No, that was the US Army.
It would have been like 1880s era.
Okay.
This is just the stuff that's
US Army.
that's
Yeah.
U.S. Army, yes. Because again, we only accept items of provenance, and so sometimes I wasn't there when the Vancouver Barracks collections were taken, or were assessed. But what I found is that a lot of collections were instead of taking the entire thing, they were instead the processor picked and chose the stuff out of regarding Fort Lewis, and then declined to accept the entirety of the collection.
With their service numbers,
Yes.
what's the best website to access those?
Publicly accessing.
Yeah.
I do not believe that there is.
There was, about a year ago, there was a friend of mine had a Bowie knife, and it had a service number on it. Some way, shape, or form, I found who that belonged to. And it was on a website, just on the internet, but I couldn't find it again. And
Probably because they pulled it, right? The
Well,
service
they-
numbers were essentially a social security number, sort of.
not
no,
quite.
it was
Not really,
actually, service numbers
I know
was
my dad
about
had
my
one.
era. It
Yeah.
changed over about my time.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, service numbers aren't. They're not necessarily. They're PII, privately identifiable information.
Right.
But they're not necessarily restricted PII. If you're looking for an inquiry based on a service number, I would recommend sending in a research request to NARA.
Like on dog tags.
Yes, I would recommend NARA.
Okay.
If that doesn't work, however, and once again, I'm not here to advertise or advocate for these websites. Fold 3 is specifically a military ancestry database, and it is run by the Ancestry Group. Yes.
It's kind of exciting, I don't know if everybody's heard, but you can now access that at home with your library card.
Yes.
So you don't have to pay.
Yes, and so if you contact the local library, there should be a reference librarian who keeps that information, which subscriptions that your library has access to.
It's all on the website.
Yes. Yes, sir.
How do you determine other repositories in the area or anywhere?
So when it comes to determining a repository, we're only officially allowed to recommend other Army Museum Enterprise institutions. The Army Museum Enterprise being the network of a couple dozen military museums run by the United States Army. I'm able to, under the table, recommend such as the Naval Undersea Museum or the Veterans Memorial Museum. I'm able to kind of push people that way, but I'm only able to officially recommend official Army institutions when it comes to referring to a different. For example, if you had the 1st Infantry Division's collection, I would refer you to the 1st Infantry Museum as opposed to ours, because the 1st Infantry Division was never garrison stationed or generally affiliated with Fort Lewis.
So when you mentioned Island County, that's an under-the-table deal.
So Island County, I specifically mentioned because we actually received Batman's collection from the Island County Museum. And so that's just the one that popped into my head.
I see.
But yes. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering why Captain Batman was incarcerated.
So, fantastic story. It's one of the greatest shows of officership I've ever seen in my life. So Captain Batman was attending today's equivalent of the Captain's Career Course. He was training, I believe he was at Camp Benning. It was Camp Benning at the time, not Fort Benning. And he was a captain, and his instructor for drill and ceremonies was a first lieutenant. And he, according to the witness statements, the lieutenant had failed him for this section of drill and ceremony. And when being asked to repeat this section, Captain Batman said something along the lines of, I'll have to pull it out, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something along the lines of, thank God you're not one of the officers in my section, I'd show you how to DNC, goddamn you. And so this was insubordination to a superior instructor, and so he was actually incarcerated, like he was held, barred from taking tasks, barred from visiting the commissary, barred from leaving confines of quarters for a number of weeks while the court-martial system played out. I'll pull out that folder specifically so you can take a look through the witness testimony. And he actually has the official court-martial's, the verdict in there as well. It's pretty fascinating.
You mess up a career.
He was found not guilty.
Still messes up a career.
Thankfully not back then. They were kind of hurting for active duty officers in the interwar period. You had a question, Aaron?
Yeah, did you receive any records from Fort Steilacoom?
I don't believe so. We have the onesies and twosies from private donors regarding Fort Steilacoom, but Fort Steilacoom is actually a little bit before our collecting area time period. Yes?
You have a lot of pictures on file?
We have tens of thousands of pictures.
And so at the museum, then you could find the era? I mean, to be able to go through some of those, or?
You're able to go through some of those. Obviously, we're not able to pull out
Right.
the tens of thousands that we
Yeah.
have available. But if you're able to narrow down...
So my barracks that you tore down?
Yes, I actually have some of those. There's actually a news story you can look.
Probably a new batch.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting story. They actually offered to take one of these barracks buildings, lift the entire thing up,
Wow.
and plop it down right next to the museum, and turn it into the exhibit.
Wow.
It would have been fantastic. However, again, there are 2 full-time staff members plus myself,
Mm-hmm.
and they did not offer us any money to do
Disassemble
anything.
and assemble again.
They offered us the triple nickel engineering battalion to pick it up and move it, and then
It's yours.
Yeah.
That's all there is.
Yep.
Take care of it.
But before they did lock everything up, one of the other staff members and I did take a visit out there. We collected a number of photographs, a number of minor detail sketches for historical posterity use in case they wanted to build something like an exhibit in the future. There may have been some breaking and entering done, but I'm not a lawyer, so. The locks were unlocked. They wouldn't want you, they wouldn't say stay out if the locks were unlocked. Are there any other questions? Before I incriminate myself further, are there any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.